This is Everlasting Lucifer, episode 33, and it's chapter 20, In the Weave. Keitaki sat on the platform outside the Millennium Centre in Dorpui and smoked her Roli. The sun shone on her face. Even in the pleather jacket she'd bought yesterday in the Zion Street flea market, she was cold. She'd slept badly. Half her tobacco was gone. She'd bought it in Kensington the day she flew out of London. It was only when she'd landed in Delhi and was waiting to change planes that she discovered Vaid was on his way back from Bombay. But the exhibition was as good as over, her work was done, and she couldn't wait any longer to figure out what was happening between them. It was time to go home. She felt a mild bronchial ache and inhaled the cold air and traffic fumes along with the cigarette smoke. Passers-by, enigmatic and black, looked at her, stared, looked away. She watched gaggles of Mizo girls, neat, with long dyed hair and blunt fringes, talking and chewing betel nut. In the afternoon she had her appointment with Kevin, one of the Aizawl contacts Shunando had given her. "You don't know Kevin?" Shunando's quiet voice said with surprise over the phone. "He does projects with local weavers in Aizawl, and designs. I think you must have seen some of his things in the house. Give him a call, he'll help you." In the afternoon she walked to the textile department, breathing in the sharp autumnal air. Aizawl felt like another zone, so far east it was almost in Myanmar. As an Assamese woman she was a foreigner here, associated more with the mainland. That morning she had woken in the hotel to hear the neighbourhood crier announcing the news on a tannoy. People dressed in dark colours hurried to church, and at lunchtime she saw men clustering around street-side noodle stalls. "Keitaki?" Kevin was tall and softly spoken. He took her into his bare governmental office. "So," he said, "tell me what brings you to Aizawl." Keitaki smiled. "I'm interested in starting a textile project at home, somewhere in Assam," she said. "I've been working in a bit of design, but more exhibitions, curating. I've always wanted to do something with textiles. Fewer people wear traditional clothes these days, so I wanted to use elements of the textiles in simple things." Kevin nodded, his face wary. "Making dresses out of the textiles?" he said. Keitaki smiled. "I have ambivalent feelings about it too," she said. "But using the traditional cloth in some way, an element of it, in some way that makes it part of everyday life." "I make both, you know," Kevin said. "Our traditional puan, the wraparound skirt, and other clothes too. But I'm going to send you to a friend's mother to find out more about the puan." The next morning Keitaki sat in Auntie's immaculate living room, while her host, neatly dressed in a puan and cardigan, showed her pictures and explained the different patterns. "This one," pointing to a picture of interlinking chevrons, "we call tiger stripe, and this one shows, what do you call it?" She pushed her bifocals up her nose. "The thing in a field that stops flooding." "A dike?" "Yes, and this one," she giggled, "we call senior. It's for older ladies." That afternoon at Kevin's house, Keitaki asked him, "Why don't you wear your own designs?" He was dressed in a t-shirt, a zip top and track pants. "Oh," Kevin said sweetly. He put hot water in a teapot with green tea leaves in it. "I do for formal occasions, but our Mizo clothes are too different for every day." Keitaki laughed. "To me the everyday of Aizawl is poetic, Kevin." "Really?" He cocked an eye at her. "Why?" "Well, for one thing, the light. You are even east of Assam, and it's so golden. Filtered, almost. And you're hill people. This morning," she said, "I looked out of the window of my room. I'm on the 4th floor of the hotel. I saw a woman on a sloping rooftop across the street. First she hung out some clothes. Then she started texting and talking on the phone. She was still standing on this narrow bit of roof, as though she'd forgotten she was so high up there. She was standing on one foot," she began to mimic, "talking, and then with the other foot she was pushing a loose tile." Keitaki burst out laughing. "I wanted to lean out of the window and shout, 'Be careful!'" Kevin laughed. "It's true, we are used to heights," he said. "And the little narrow staircases between streets on a hill," Keitaki went on, "like in Shillong. Aizawl feels different to me, enclosed, like a secret. I like that. Walking around the city, people say that people in Shillong are well-dressed, but Aizawl has an extraordinary relationship with clothing. I've seen the young people, in all the different sports clothes, running shoes, and there are all the stalls in the market selling clothes. Near Zion Street, I saw maybe one woman with just a couple of old t-shirts and some socks that she was selling. But some of the stalls are so big, and they have the same Nike shoes in yellow, blue, red, green, pink. Is the whole of Aizawl always buying and selling clothes?" Kevin laughed. "We do like our sportswear, and it's true, people buy a lot of clothes, second-hand as well as new. But the sportswear, a lot of it that you saw is not authentic, you know. They're copies that come from Burma. Not bad copies. Ketaki walked back to her hotel via the Zion Street market as the last light of the dull winter afternoon faded into smoky evening. She looked at the straight-haired girls, the men in hats, young people in tracksuits, coloured sneakers, sweatshirts, leather and pleather jackets. People moved with toddler-like determination. Women bumped into her without apology. Sometimes it seemed without noticing. Clothes stores were everywhere. Hoodies, trainers, beanies, grey, blue, black, navy, striped, plain, jersey, knitted, polyester, cotton, wool, tights, boots, sweaters, jackets. The felicitous mixed with the ugly in every possible permutation. Everyone was expressing a mood in clothing, enacting the transient but compelling life of the street. The next day, Kevin had promised to take her to meet Mimi, one of the women who wove for him. That evening in her hotel room, Ketaki drew tracksuit pants with a woven tiger stripe down the back, a black shirt whose cuffs folded back to show a bright geometric pattern in purple, blue, green, a t-shirt with a patterned stripe at the round collar. On her way to meet Kevin the next morning, she stopped at a small cafe for breakfast. Halfway through, she picked up her phone. Messages from Ved. She dialed a number. When there was an answer, she said, "Do you know that the place I've seen athletic shoes worn most elegantly was a Buddhist monastery, by the novices? You haven't really seen sportswear till you've seen it on a 14-year-old Tibetan monk." There was a dry chuckle at the other end of the line. "It's perfectly all right, you know, to telephone and begin a conversation like other human beings," said a deep voice. "You want me to be like other human beings?" inquired Ketaki. "Is it even possible?" asked Joy Mama. "What do you think," she said, sipping her glutinous coffee and eyeing the flies around the sugar bowl, "of the name Social Fabric for a company that does something with handloom?" She took a bite of her very sweet cake and gave up. Her uncle sighed. "Are you coming here?" he asked unusually directly. "Has something happened?" she said. "I was going to stay in Aizawl a few more days, then go to Pehi's, then come. It's good to be home." "I'm glad," he said. "Come when you can." "Are you all right?" "It's not that, Ketu. Tuku's gone." "Gone? Gone where?" "I've no idea." Her uncle's voice faded back into understatement. "See you when you get here." She phoned her aunt in Guwahati, but no one answered. Suddenly she wanted to be elsewhere. Aizawl, its smoke and hills, its clear air and sunshine and endless churches, felt too far from home, and from London and her friends, from Mark, from Ved. Ketaki gazed at the line of customers pointing out different pink and yellow cakes at the counter. Where could Tuku have gone? If he had been a normal servant instead of an unusual family member, they would have assumed he had returned to his village. But he had no village, no family other than them. She thought of Tuku when they had been children, a serious but smiling boy, 3 years older than she. At the terrible time when a 7-year-old Ketaki had been sobbing on her bed, unable to imagine telling anyone what was happening, but also unable to continue, it had been Tuku who had gone to talk to Joy Mama. First, Ketaki's parents sent her away to school. When she returned to Jorhat a few months later in the first holiday, Sandeep Mama, her mother's eldest brother, had gone. His room was bare, and there were gaps on the bookshelves where his books had been. Joy Mama had bent down to her, his face damp. "You will never have to see him again," he said clearly. She thought of those years, boarding school and an interrupted but intense life in Jorhat and Guwahati that had less and less to do with her parents. Her mother was an occasional presence, her father at first working in Upper Assam, then in Calcutta, and after the divorce a more distant figure. When he was diagnosed with liver disease, she saw him once or twice in Delhi, weak but still gracious. Then she went to England to study. She went outside and lit a cigarette, leaning against the concrete wall outside the Millennium Centre. At some point in that peripatetic childhood life, Tuku had retreated into the status of a neighbour or a former school friend. Her old love for him was still there, but she knew little of him, or relied on what she had known earlier. He had used to call her Bondi, little sister, but at some point in her adolescence began to address her as Baido, though with an affection that transformed the honorific. It was Joy Mama who took an interest in Tuku, supervised his schooling, enrolled him in junior college and then college. Even in leisurely, slowly spoken Jorhat, Joy Mama had visibly been a man who had time for everything. In his calm, ironic way, he pursued Tuku to get through college, where he just about graduated, before deciding he didn't want to work elsewhere than for them. He looked after the house, ran errands for Joy Mama, and made it possible for Keitaki to be away without worrying. As for Tuku, he said he didn't want to get married or have a family. "What will Dada do if I'm not here?" he asked her smilingly of her uncle. She smoked her cigarette, looked at the tightly packed traffic down the narrow sloping roads, and thought about the two of them. What else could it be but love, to do everything you could to enable someone to leave you? And what else could it be, other than love, not to leave when you could? Electronic church bells pealed. She thought of Vade. Then her phone began to ring. "Hello?" "Keitaki," said Kevin's quiet voice. "Where are you?" "Oh, sorry, Keitaki said. "Where are you?" "I'm nearly at Electric Veng," she lied, getting into a taxi. "I'm sorry, it took me a little while to find a cab because of the rain." "Okay," said Kevin, neither angry nor believing her. "Because I wanted to take you to Mimi's, and I have to go somewhere else after that." Half an hour later, the two of them were in another cab, heading to Mimi's house, through streets so narrow and enclosed by the shape of the hill that they felt almost sunken like trenches. Keitaki sat hunched and looked at the small flower pots crowded in verandas and balconies, at women leaning down to chat to a young man on the street, at people on scooters pausing to talk to friends. Perhaps life was best this way, other people's, viewed in transit, full of surface texture. An hour or two later she was eating noodles in Mimi's house. Mimi's young daughters and teenage niece wandered around, making tea, watching television, helping their grandmother wind yarn into hanks on a hexagonal frame. Keitaki sat on the sofa, near Mimi, who sat on the floor, working on the simple wooden loin loom strapped around her back and braced against her foot. She passed the yarn through the warp, then used a heavy wooden shuttle to push it down. She must have felt every movement of the loom against her body, her back straight and her legs stretched out. But she worked quietly, absorbed, smiling when someone spoke to her, but barely looking up, even to eat. And yet, each event in the house, each mood and laugh that happened around her became part of the strip of cloth Mimi was weaving, so that her mother's animated clowning, the talk of her niece and the neighbours who walked through the small house from back to front, or the patter of the older woman selling parathas who came to offer her some at the front door, all became absorbed in her concentration, and so into the cloth as she wove it. In the afternoon, after awkward hugs and photographs, and after watching part of a kung fu film dubbed into Mizo with the kids, Keitaki said goodbye and wandered back into the rain to find another taxi. She had 2 missed calls on her phone from Vade. When she got to the hotel, she'd call him.